Hey, what's good, family? Welcome to the final part of looking at the track My Beloved, which is going to cover a lot of the arrangement ideas behind how I made this track. The previous videos covered the drums, the bass, and the melodic section. And if you haven't seen that yet, I'd encourage you guys to go take a look. But I'm pretty excited to kind of share how this all came about, and hopefully I'll try to keep this relatively organized. Alright, so this is kind of an unconventional song, so to speak, just because it has multiple parts that almost sound like it could be a bunch of different songs melted in one. But there is definitely some rhyme to reason of why or how I kind of came about what I did. And before I actually start talking about the song specifically, I'd like to kind of introduce my workflow to you guys, so that way you have an idea about how everything came together. So let's go ahead and start with that.
Soul Steel!
Now in my other project file, which you guys have seen in the previous videos, you'll see that I actually do my sound design in a separate project. And just like with the melodics and the bass and the drums, I literally try to do everything that I can to create as much musical content before I actually start putting things together. It allows me to kind of focus on making the song and connecting it as far as telling a story, as opposed to feeling like there's something missing down the road in the earlier stages, and then feeling like I have to go back and do the sound design for that, if that makes sense. So within this project, there is a common folder that you've probably seen many times, which is called SD versus AD. I guess in this folder I have all of the samples that have everything that I've used, well, almost everything that I've used within this tune itself. So here's some basses. That's the downbeat bass, which you've seen in the other tracks, and then I have the drums from SD Variations. And so keeping that in mind, while I have done everything that I can, and I feel like I have come to a point where I'm ready to move on, what I've done is I just start with the drums, usually, which is the main section, and I start trying to make the drum groove and then make that connect with the bass. So usually the melodic stuff comes way after, but once I have a solid groove, or I guess even just a solid single bar like I've talked about before, I will try to just make that catchy and then go into something else, if that makes sense. Or I guess lead it into a second part. So building off of these main sections, you can kind of see how everything starts to come together as building blocks. And as you can look at from the way that I have this organized, we have an intro, a main section 1B, a bridge, a build, main section 2, and so forth. And what I kind of do to kind of create these components is I will build the main section A, and then I will duplicate everything and make a variation on main section B, and do the same thing until I'm ready to have some kind of bridge or break within the drop. So this main section 1 becomes main section 1B in some way, which is kind of like an amalgamation. And you can kind of tell that within the main section 1A and 1B, the feel of the groove is relatively the same, except that in the main section A, I have a focus on the bass, because that's like the hard-hitting part that I want to try to embrace you and then take you on that journey within the musical components. And then the bridge, it can be something in between. I don't always write a bridge, but it's just something that if you are feeling more melodic, then you can kind of continue that, or you can even go into, you know, another like bass heavy focus thing before you do your breakdown. Moving on, I guess, in this break, this is kind of the big transition between one part to another. So after this melodic bridge or whatever, where it feels and encompasses you with emotion, the only thing that continues within this part is just ambient noises that kind of carry you on within the track. There is some violin that is hitting a tremolo that is letting you know that there's still more of the song to come, and that helps build anticipation. And so within that, listening to the tremolo, it allows you to kind of introduce the pizzicato and the bass and all of these other transitional noises that kind of symbolize that it's getting ready to change. And that's kind of how you can use this as a means to connect And in my opinion, when it comes to storytelling or it comes to making a complete composition in general, it's all about the transitions, because how you get from one place to another is something that either makes or breaks a song. You know, even if the mix isn't that great, if it has this really powerful message that works in between, then it's something that you can kind of forgive. And of course, like, I'm talking about my own music, but this isn't the only example that I've heard, and I would be the first to admit that my mixing isn't the best. So within all of these main sections, I've created, 3 different versions of this, and each one kind of has a different feel to it. And coming up with this kind of stuff, or this melodic content, just kind of spawns from different ideas or reference tracks that I've had. So listening to this main section 1 here, I didn't really have a reference of where I wanted the bass line to go, so that was just kind of like a trial by error. But these melodic sections here, and then the bridge, those actually came from reference tracks from Castlevania, as well as the main section 3. Actually, for the most part, the rest of these tunes are just some kind of amalgamation of Castlevania tunes that I really enjoy. And for me, I just try to interpret those within my own variations within it. Something that you can kind of go off that is relatively fun to play with or jarring is that, you know, with this main section 1, it's all about the bass, right? You have these like cool monster sounds or whatever, and then for the majority of the rest of the tune, it takes a melodic kind of sequence. And what happens is you stop. I guess what I did was I stopped making or introducing those neuro sounds, and then I allowed this relatively consistent resub to help accentuate the storytelling. You can see that that's pretty consistent up until that last part that kind of like is the final shebang of the rest of the tune. In my opinion, you know, if you just write out this, then that can pretty much be the main part of your song, and you don't really have to do a whole lot else. But, you know, for me and the people that I listen to, Echo especially, they're a huge influence on how I like to make these things. It's cool to see how many variations you can come up with as far as making these tunes and then try to make them fit, which is where the transitions come in. If you look over here in these sections, you can see that I actually have these other sections of the song that I didn't think that actually like made the cut, no pun intended. And just it's just like random MIDI and stuff that I've bounced out to have ideas, but rather than delete it and throw it away, while it does make my project file much bigger than it needs to be, it's something that I can use in the future for IPs. It's something that I can just try to replace and come up with things, but it's a really solid way for you to just continue working, right? If you know how the song structure goes and you know that there needs to be a main section 1 and a main section B, well, what comes next? The bridge, right? So you can take all of these elements, move them over here in your play area, and then start rearranging and seeing if you can come up with something interesting. And if not, then try it again and bounce out different ideas, and you'll be amazed about how many different like versions of the song you can make. And there's something to be said about that, because some people believe I don't want to say that. Some people have this workflow choice of just creating like several different versions and doing it within that project file. But for me, this is just kind of how I've come to do those quote-unquote versions. So at the end of the day, there's only one version of the track, and that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. It's just what I've ended up doing. So one more point that I want to try to, I guess, accentuate to kind of help everything gel is the idea of using transitional sounds. And it was something that we kind of glanced over in the third part of the melodic section, but I wanted to focus on it in this part because these sounds here with ambience and reverse noises and stuff are what helps you open the door to the next part of the track. So if we listen to some of that stuff here, let's just go ahead and solo the ambience parts. And as you can kind of tell, like they're not too complicated other than maybe the second build here, where I'm using this to build tension. And kind of these are all just sounds that kind of serve and help you lead from one place to the other. And this is something that I think a lot of newer producers overlook, is that they usually don't use a lot of this stuff in order to transition to the next thing. And you can actually do it creatively without it if you have like some cool glitch things or whatever. I do those micro edits mostly in that first section, kind of like right here, I think, where it goes bump, bump, bump. So all of those little like things that you use to kind of break up the groove and the sequences are very universal in the sense of like how you look at the overall tune. So in that sense, when you use these kind of white noises and drones and things, they add more atmosphere to your songs if you're going for something like this anyways. And it also helps you kind of go from one place to the other. So with these, there's this build. And then when that bass hits, there's that power that kind of like brings, or I guess piques your interest. So in essence, to kind of recap, these are pretty much 3 songs that I've created in some form or another. So we have our intro that goes all the way up to our bridge, then the build up to the second bridge, and then we have our main section with our final glitch and our outro. And to be honest, it's kind of like almost like songception, right? Because these can all be their own tunes within themselves. But the way that I kind of think and try to put these things together is I will create these variations and these songs that were written non-linearly. Is that a word? That were written in a non-linear fashion. And I guess the goal of writing all of these is to just try to fit how they can all come together at once. Because again, they can kind of be their own entities, if that makes sense. And it's really fun to do because it gives your song a lot of variation. It's a lot more work for sure, because most people would just do a copy paste job. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that if your stuff is super interesting, but for me, like, dude, I get hella bored. I'm like, yeah, I like this loop, cool, I want to hear something else. And I don't know about you guys, but that's just how I work. As far as going from nothing to something, you know, just start with that main bar, duplicate those sections, and then eventually you will just start duplicating more and more and adding variation. And it's just kind of like almost like remixing your own stuff. You start with like this, and then you move it over and remix that, and then you move it over and remix that, and it becomes kind of like this cool amalgamation of just, I don't know. But sometimes it definitely comes out to be crap. I have so many projects that I've started and I'm like, oh yeah, I can't wait to release my new song or whatever, and then like it just fizzles out. That's part of it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I know that this was a lot more informative as far as like telling jokes and stuff, but I think that there's some good stuff in here for you guys all to just kind of dissect. So yeah, that kind of concludes the tutorial series, and I hope that this was something that was enjoyable to you all and engaging and all that. I have some announcements to make in my future videos, but now that this is over, I have some really cool stuff that I'd like to come out with as well that you guys can look forward to in the future. So thank you all for watching, and if you have any comments or anything, then let me know in the description, or any questions or whatever. But other than that, happy producing.